Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We're going to give it one more minute as have a number of people signing on, so we'll get started shortly. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar on benchmarking and end-of-contract decisions. I'm Alex Kozloff, Director of Content at Allsbridge. Before we get started, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please enter them in the box that you see on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will leave some time at the end for Q&A. And for any questions that we don't get to during the session, we'll follow up offline and connect with you. Also, just as a reminder, the slides and a recording of the discussion will be available, and we'll be sending that out in the next few days. So today's discussion will be led by Howard Davies and Chris Patacini. They're two Allsbridge managing directors both with extensive experience in the benchmarking space. And today they're going to focus somewhat specifically on the role of benchmarks at the end of a contract term, and how evolving market conditions and new technologies are redefining some of these traditional considerations that clients and providers face at the end of an outsourcing contract. And they'll also share some recent findings from the Allsbridge Pro Benchmark database, and they'll review that in a bit of detail. So with that, I'll turn it over to Howard Davies to get the discussion started.
Thanks, Alex, and welcome everyone. Happy to talk to you for the next 50 minutes or so with my colleague Chris. And this has been a webinar for those of you that have joined before. We've run every 6 months typically, talking about pricing in the market, and particularly here as it relates to your end of contract or upcoming end of contract decision making. So we'll talk a little bit about Allsbridge and Pro Benchmark. Hopefully most of you are familiar with us and the work we do, but I want to make sure everyone is familiar with us as a company. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things to be thinking about around contracting and the pricing and other service-related issues around the contract endpoint. We'll talk about some of the newer technologies, some of the disruptive approaches coming to pass now that can have some interesting implications on contracting and pricing, and some of the ways to look at benchmarking those kinds of contracts. And then we'll talk a little bit about RPA and cloud specifically, and then we'll go through some of the major market changes happening across the primarily ITO, but also we'll look at applications, telecoms, and some of the BPO functions as well. So just a quick introduction to Allsbridge and Pro Benchmark. The Pro Benchmark team are a part of Allsbridge, and we basically develop and use a tool set called Pro Benchmark, which we do for all benchmarking that Allsbridge conducts. It's a patented tool set, covers all industries and geographies, and from the work we do, we see about 800 or so tower contracts a year, so it's about 1,500 over the last 2 years. A pretty broad range of contracts that we work on, from $1 million a year right up to $1 billion plus in spend annually. All of that data comes from contracts that we've advised on, either a new contract that a client signs or a benchmark of an in-progress contract. All of that data is used as part of our benchmarking database, and we basically aggregate it all into this patented tool set called Pro Benchmark, and don't show any individual client or provider data, as you can imagine, but essentially it gives us the ability to look at the correlations between the price drivers in a contract or in an operation and the impact they have on market pricing. And Allsbridge, that we're a part of, has been going for about 12 years now. We do a huge number of transactions and a vast number of contracting globally, and have been the subject of many awards, including the IAOP, for the last 6 years. You see here a few of the clients that we tend to work with, usually in the Fortune 1000 range. As you see, it's multiple sectors here. And at the bottom, just a quick view of the kinds of services we provide. We obviously do a lot of work around advisory in the sourcing space, the benchmarking, which we'll be talking about here. We have a team that work on the network services for pricing compression and cost takeout, and the same for hardware and software for license agreements for hardware products and software licenses for the infrastructure services. And then lastly, we have a team who actually run contract management functions to look at contract expectations and obligations and track those over time as part of a supply management function. So that's a quick overview of the company. If we go to the next slide, talk a little bit about the kinds of things to be thinking around on the end of contract subject. As you know, where you have contracts in progress, there are always various options to you. As you approach the end of the term, clearly you have the option to renew with the incumbent provider or rebid the work through some kind of RFP process, to renegotiate those services directly without going to market, to negotiate to what you would consider to be a value for money price at current market rates, or even repatriate, in other words, bring some of that work or all of that work back in-house and run that for your own, from your own IT or business function. So at the same time, of course, the volumes of work are changing, and so there is always the option to keep the scope the same as before when you're going to end of term and just look to extend the scope or extend the time frame. But there may be other aspects, other services that are coming into play. There could be acquisitions going on or divestments that would change the volume and structure of work. So those are also considerations. Could more work or less work be part of the continuation of that contract? Also, it's not just about the price, it's also about the satisfaction of services. So the relationship is also important. If the pricing feels okay, there can still be question marks around the relationship with the provider or providers, and so again, that's something that may be in consideration for what improvements could be made to make the deal extend. There's also the potential to negotiate directly with the incumbent or look at other particular providers who may have emerging capabilities, and this is particularly relevant when we're talking about some of the emerging technologies. It's becoming more common for clients to consider splitting up the existing contract and allocating work to multiple providers where there may have only been one provider originally. So those are all the kind of things that come up, and of course the question is, well, what's the cost of change, what's the risk of change, what's the time it'll take to do that, is there a benefit that's greater than the cost of change to make it worth going to market, and also of course is there a real benefit in bringing work in-house if the contract's been in place for some time, what risks does that introduce into the whole decision. So these are some of the things that should be thought about, and we'll explore some of these as we go through this session. Now, obviously, you will hear about cloud. That's been around for a few years now. We model cloud pricing within our toolset. This is becoming more and more popular as a production delivery method, and is clearly having an impact on pricing for the virtual images that are part of a cloud solution. Autonomics in its many flavors has also come up, particularly on the BPO side, but also now is emerging into the ITO space, using RPA techniques to take on and automate without necessarily even improving the efficiency, just taking the existing functions and using robotic tools to be able to run that same work process. Those things are making quite big changes to the market, and again, when you're coming towards end of term, it's highly likely that you'll have a provider or maybe the incumbent provider offering some of that capability as a way to drive additional savings through the term of the follow-on contract. So that can also make it difficult to compare current to future, because clearly if you're changing your operating model, then it will be difficult to have an apples-to-apples comparison, because you're taking workloads under a traditional environment and changing those to a new environment. And of course the impact of benchmarking is to be able to manage that change, to be able to identify what the true benefit would be to that kind of a change in your operation. So that's really part of the topic here. We'll talk a little bit about how we're seeing pricing changing and how benchmarking can help in those activities. So to talk a bit about benchmarking, obviously Chris and I have been in this business for 20 years or more, so pretty familiar with the different approaches out there. Historically, benchmarking has been quite labor intensive for the client. And the reason for that is that often the traditional approach has been to capture a large amount of data through the use of templates and so on that the client typically has to spend quite a lot of time fathoming out as to what the questions mean, going and collecting the data, not being too sure which of those data points are important and which aren't. That puts a pretty big onus on the client to go collect that information. That can take many weeks to go through, and so a benchmark traditionally has been typically 2 or 3 months to go through. Well, clearly with the rate of change in technology, that's not really appropriate anymore because the changes can happen very quickly. So that's one of the drawbacks with the traditional method. It takes a long time, quite labor intensive, and it tends to be focused on specific towers, using the existing operation and doing comparisons on just a like-for-like basis. That can also be difficult when you're going into negotiations with a provider because clearly both parties have a different understanding of what the services are and how they should be valued, and that can make it difficult to go through the benchmark process where the parties don't really have a common understanding of how the operation works, what the real price drivers are, what the impact is of service levels on pricing and so on, and can make those historical benchmark activities quite difficult to get through. So one of the things that we've been working on, and there's definitely a trend in the market, is to have a lot more automation in the benchmarking data collection, to map information from existing databases directly into the benchmark tools, and to be able to pull data quickly and model that in real time. And as we heard earlier, the ProBenchmark toolset is a way for us to do that. It's a real-time pricing tool that is an online tool that allows us to populate data very quickly and then work more on what does it all mean, how can it be interpreted when you're coming up to do the benchmark analysis. So it's about quickly getting the data in, looking at not just the current performance as to how you compare to the market on a like-for-like basis, but also, more importantly, what happens if you change things? What happens if you change the service levels? What happens if you increase the virtualization? What happens if you change the onshore-offshore mix? That the beauty of the online tool approach is that it allows you to look at not just doing the same stuff the same way at a marginally lower cost, but changing more fundamentally how you deliver service or how the provider delivers service to you, and looking at what additional opportunities there are by making those kind of step changes. So that has a big impact when you're looking at new technologies, because it lets you look at things like taking the same volumes you have on a traditional server operation and running it through a cloud, like a simulated solution, to show what that might cost on a different operating platform. So that's one of the beauties of this kind of approach. It allows you to look at other scenarios very quickly to determine what those benefits might be. So on to the next slide. Just one example of that is in autonomics. I'm sure you will hear about that increasingly now. We've done some analysis in our own tool set to capture where we've seen autonomics within deal scenarios that have come through our advisory team. We've looked at the potential difference between a non-automated environment and an automated environment. And in this example, it's over a 3-year term for a traditional server-based infrastructure operation. And what we're showing is, on the left-hand side, that the impact of automation at different levels in terms of the problem resolution activities or the labor-based activities. You go to beyond level 1 to level 2 and 3 in terms of the automation, the more significant the savings can be. And if you look on the right-hand side, you will notice that on an as-is basis, there is a productivity-based improvement anyway in most contracts. You'll see over the term of a 3 to 5 year contract, there will be a certain amount of improvement built into that on an assumption of a straight line volume. You'll see some improvements in pricing. What we tend to see, at least so far with the use of RPA, in these contracts is that there's a price spike in the first year as there's the cost of the conversion and implementation of the RPA solution. But then as you go into years 2 to 3, you'll start to see some pretty substantial improvements in the unit pricing over that time. And clearly that's going to have a pretty significant benefit if you look at the overall term of the deal. We've seen basically in the range of sort of 5 to 25% unit price performance improvement over a 3 to 5 year deal if you take the whole TCV of that contract. So that's having obviously a disruptive effect in the market, and that obviously is a driver of clients being more and more interested in that, and also of the providers having to have a solution to be able to compete where this technology is being deployed. So that's one of the things that we're starting to see as an example around automation. Chris, I know you're there and you've seen this a lot yourself. Chris, any other comments you would add in terms of what you're seeing in the level of automation that's coming into client contracts?
Yeah, thanks, Howard. I think this is a good example of a sort of a game changer or a sea change in the market where it makes sense in some cases to actually go to market or at least get a benchmark to understand how the market is moving, both in terms of the what the price change would look like, but also in terms of the solution itself and the potential benefits. And our experience is if you're not doing a benchmark or competing the service at the end of contract, you're not going to see as much of that capability that providers might bring to the table. Or if they bring it to the table, they're not sharing as much of the savings opportunity that you might otherwise get. And we'll talk in greater detail, especially around service desk, storage, and server. We'll talk about those three because those are areas where we're seeing pretty significant and recurring savings opportunities for clients that are paying attention to the market, if you will.
Right. Okay, that's good. So before I let Chris talk more about these pricing trends, just to give you an idea of the areas that we're talking about here. As you know, we're very well known in the IT market and the BPO market. We typically cover these services on the left-hand side for all geographies. Infrastructure, which would be all of the typical server and mainframe-based operations of the data center. Obviously, cloud is a big part of the data we're seeing now. We include all the end-user computing, the managed print services, and all the network activities that go around device management. We cover all applications, whether it's labor rate or transaction-based application services in development and maintenance. I mentioned the network, which includes all of the telecom, the carrier services, the hardware and software that goes to support that, whether it's for the mobile device management or for database tools and supporting software. And like I say, in business, we cover finance and accounting, HR, the source-to-pay functions, as well as call center and some industry verticals as well. So that kind of gives you a bit of background of the areas that we cover, and we're going to go through most of these on a tower-by-tower basis to show you how some of the pricing changes have happened in the last 12 months, where we expect those to go, and some of the impact of the contracts, the term of the contract on that as well.
Great, thanks, Howard. And I'll go ahead and talk through some of these market trends that we're seeing, and again, relating it back to why benchmarking is important to make sure that organizations are not only taking advantage of the new technologies and the platforms, but also gaining the benefits that are achieved through those. I won't read all of these, but these are certainly examples of the kinds of things we're seeing in the market that do result in sea changes. So the first one there, the adoption of virtual desktop infrastructure, or VDI, is something that has taken a lot longer than, for example, cloud implementation in the server market. But we are starting to see adoption here, and that can result in a 20 to 30% reduction in support costs for those devices that are being managed in a virtual desktop manner. So again, if you're looking to create or generate opportunities for savings, that's certainly an area where you'd want to look The next one, intelligent process automation, or IPA. Also, we talk about it as RPA or autonomics. This again, as I mentioned earlier, in the service desk, storage, backup, server areas. Notably, we're seeing very significant changes as a result, and we'll talk about those as well. Skipping down to the cloud providers is another example where we're seeing pure play cloud providers and also traditional outsourcers entering the market with solutions. And the key here is, one of the benefits of cloud solutions is the ability to spin up and spin down, for example, an infrastructure service, a server image. And with the telecom and storage capabilities, being able to replicate that image to another data center over the wire, and then boot that server in a new location, you really can minimize the transition or transaction costs associated with migrating to a new platform, and doing it almost in real time. We're doing it with very little capital expense, because the providers are now starting to provide solutions where they have the capacity and the capability already seated in their environments, and you're basically it's basically a virtual move to a new platform, and that platform has much better management capabilities and much more power and control. And then, of course, in the storage and backup, that's an area where automation has been used quite widely. And when you talk about a service that has dropped in price, this is not just an order of magnitude drop in price over the last decade or so, but multiple orders of magnitude. And this is one where people always wonder how low can the price go. And of course, we see sort of a doubling of the usage in storage in shorter and shorter time frames. It used to be a couple of years before we would make a double, and now we're seeing some organizations in less than 6 months. So their appetite for storage has certainly increased, but it's been offset by price reductions, unit price reductions due to the automation that's been implemented. So these are just a few examples of some of the market trends we're seeing, and why it's important at the end of a contract to really understand the market and get a sense for what the market is looking like. And on this next slide, we have some specific examples of how we're seeing the price change year on year. So if you were to go to market for any of these services, this is the price reduction that you would expect to get in any particular year compared to the subsequent year. Now, the reality is that most organizations don't go to market every year, so they don't see these savings each year. And we'll talk about why that is. But the reality is that the market is moving pretty significantly due to all the changes that we've talked about thus far, and some of the others that we'll talk about in greater detail. And so that's why benchmarking is benchmarking, and then also competitively bidding transactions at end of term is very, very important. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is on this slide here. When you think about long-term transactions and the way they're packaged, there is financial risk on the part of the provider to commit to decreasing savings over time. So if you look at the table on the right-hand side at the top there, there's some example of the typical annual market price decreases that you'll see that we witness in the marketplace. And then if you open up a contract and look at the price reductions that the provider is providing year on year, they're lower due to financial risk and forecasting risk. So they're committing to price reductions, but they're not as significant as what has been happening in the market. And so you can imagine in the table down below, or the chart down below, where the blue line there kind of represents the market price, or the price of the transaction you're paying for over 5 years, and that decreases slightly over time. And then the green and the red lines representing the market, if you will, decreasing more significantly over time, you might actually start with a transaction that is deemed to be competitive. So in this case, if you had a transaction in 2002, 5 years ago, today in 2015 or next year in 2016, that transaction over time will move out of market just because of this gap between what we see in the price declines and what providers are willing to provide as a discounted rate over time. And so it's important for organizations to monitor and track this over time, and then make course corrections as they can, either in the middle of a transaction or at the end, certainly at the end of a transaction when it's time to renew the transaction. Our recommendation is that you either competitively bid the transaction or do a benchmark. And what happens invariably is organizations that don't do that, in this example, they might, in 2016, they might move from the blue line down to the green line, but not really get into the market range necessarily without either a benchmark or competitively bidding it, in part because they may not be taking advantage of the capabilities that exist. And so as a recent example, we have a client in the utility industry that had sole sourced their solution with a provider. It was up for renewal, and they chose to go down just to renegotiate with that existing provider. What they found is that the provider wasn't bringing capabilities like we've talked about, autonomics and the like, to the table. So the pricing didn't look that favorable. They asked us to come in, do a benchmark, and show what the actual potential would be if the provider were to implement autonomics or other kinds of automated solutions, and really to help the provider kind of drive that price or drive the solution to something that made a lot more sense. So the provider was able to get much more of a market rate with new technology and capability, rather than just signing up for the provider for another round of price reductions sort of year on year. And so
yeah, I think,
go ahead, Howard.
I was just going to add something to that, Chris. I think it's interesting for the audience here that when we talked earlier about where our data comes from, there are two moments in a contract lifecycle where we do most of our work, and the first one is just before the signature. So in this example, in 2012, we typically are doing the work to help set the price when that deal has been, or just before it's been signed, to make sure it is market competitive. And then most of the rest of the work we're doing in benchmarking typically is going to be on this example, in the 2015 range, which is usually about a year to 18 months before the end of the contract. In some cases, it's closer to the end, depending on how ready the client is to go into those negotiations. But that's a typical point where we're doing most of the benchmarks, and a lot of our data comes from what we call the in-progress deal data. So just wanted to point that out to people.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that also gives us the insight into understanding, because we work with both clients who are competitively bidding, like you said, in 2012. They might be rebidding something in 2015 in a competitive way. And we also help clients in, like I described the scenario earlier, where they want to stay with their provider, but they also want to ensure that they get a market price. And so we can see the price that the provider in a sole source arrangement would be trying to target as compared to what clients are able to get in a competitive bid situation. And we know, we've been able to model that gap and help clients get that extra, what might be 5 or 6% opportunity. But when you're looking at a multi-million-dollar transaction over 5 years, that actually is a significant opportunity.
Right. And by the way, just while I think of it, in case people haven't already done so, don't forget to add your own questions as we go through. Chris and I will be talking, both of us, through the session, but you have the ability to add your own questions, which I'll try to include in our discussion.
Great, thanks, Howard. So we're going to walk through each of these towers. I'm not going to go through every single one that we've talked about. As we mentioned, we'll make the deck available and it'll have all the content included, but in the interest of time, we'll walk through the ones that are most significantly impacted by changes in technology and talk about those. So just to kind of talk through the next few slides, we've got about 4 or 5 of them we're going to walk through. Just to kind of describe the layout here, on the left-hand side, we have trends that we're seeing in the market that are relating to technology that ultimately drive reductions in prices, and in some cases increases in prices. And then on the right-hand side, in the upper right-hand corner, you have our view of what we call the market map, which is the solutions that we see in the market, just kind of directionally what they look like. And then down below, we show a, kind of our year-on-year price change, what we anticipate seeing in the market. And again, the forecasted change year-on-year is what we're actually seeing when somebody goes to market to buy something next year or last year. What was the change that we're representing? That's what the last 12 months and the next 12 months represents. And then what we've shown below that, where it says contract year-on-year, is what the typical transaction discount would be over that same time period, over 12 months. So in this example, you can see that the last 12 months, next 12 months are in the 3 to 5 to 6% range of a decrease for the services-only solution. But if you open up a contract and look at it, you'll see decreases in the 2 to 4% range, again, due to that financial risk, which causes transactions like this to get out of market over the 4 or 5 year horizon. Similarly, on the right-hand side of that table, you've got the services and hardware bundled together. You're seeing a little bit more of a decrease due to the hardware price decreasing over time. But again, still, the contract year-on-year price decreases are less than what we would see in the market, again, due to that risk. And so in the desktop spaces, we talked about, virtual desktop is really starting to catch on. Over the last few, this has been a topic for a number of years, probably 3 or 4 years, and there were a lot of pilot projects going on, not a lot of success. People building business cases, the business cases were not proving out, but now we're starting to see adoption, targeted adoption within organizations, especially in places where you have large numbers of staff, like call centers and claim processing, where there's a large number of staff that do the same function. They require the same image on the desktop. You want it to be locked down, so for management purposes. And so, so those are the areas where we're seeing successful implementations of virtual desktop, and it's starting to pervade in the marketplace. The other trend I would say is that much more of the support that's provided in desktop is also being done remotely using automation technology. So it's less and less that someone's actually coming to a physical desktop to do work, or that the device is being shipped to a depot where it's being repaired. The devices are much more stable than they were. There's much more self-healing or remote diagnosis that can be done, which continues to further drive down the cost of the solution, and therefore the price of the solution. And again, as you migrate from one transaction to the next, you want to make sure that your provider is properly leveraging those technologies to be able to, again, drive the price to a contemporary competitive price point. And I did see a question come in. Yes, we'll make the deck available to folks, and so you'll see all the slides that are here. We may not cover them all in the interest of time, but certainly we'll make them available for everyone. In the next service tower, we have the service desk pricing, and actually, what's interesting about this one in the lower right-hand corner is you'll notice that the price has actually been increasing on a unit price basis, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is that the type of call that's being performed today is much more complex than it was a number of years ago, due to the fact that automation is handling many more of the much more automatable calls like password resets, a lot of self-help, and things like that are driving the call complexity, when it actually is a call, to be much more complex. So only the complex calls that need a person are actually being being done. So the unit prices are actually increasing because the call complexity is increasing. And what we're seeing is a price decline overall in this tower. In part because the call volumes are starting to decrease. Again, rather than there being a call and someone having to talk to someone, it's handled via self-help or just through automation. So much more, much less labor is included in the solution, which is driving down prices. We've seen some trends in the mainframe. There are very few contracts that have mainframe today, but we do track that here. I'm not going to spend much time on it. For those that are interested, they can certainly view the trends that we're seeing in the server environment. Again, this is another area where intelligent process automation or robotic process automation or autonomics is now really driving down the labor, and also, as I mentioned, cloud solutions, which really get at sort of standardized platforms, much like virtual desktop, in the same manner, with the added benefit of being able to rapidly deploy solutions, especially if you're moving through the life cycle of bringing on a new application, being able to spin up and spin down during development test, and then as well as implementation, because of the standards that are in place and the management controls around being able to manage the infrastructure, has not only resulted in price savings, but also contributing to much more improved time to market for clients, which is a great benefit. So I'll go back to an example where we had a client. They had a traditional solution. They had migrated to sort of virtual server environment with about 60% of their environment virtualized. And they came to us, asked for a benchmark, and based on the outcome of that benchmark, they decided to move almost the entire virtualized environment to a cloud platform. And because of that platform, they actually went with a different provider because the provider that they had wasn't able to implement the standards they were looking for. The migration from a virtual enterprise to a virtual private cloud in another data center, basically they performed it over a few weekends, and were able to move 600 server images pretty painlessly as compared to what might have happened 5 or 10 years ago, where backups are being made, tapes are being shipped at a minimum, and then in some cases gear putting on trucks and being shipped to another location. So the ability to move work has reduced, and has also enabled this level of competition that we haven't seen before. And again, if you're in your traditional transaction, yes, you're seeing price declines, in the 2 to 4% range, but the market's actually moving at a much higher rate than that, due to adoption of these technologies. And similarly, in storage and backup, as I mentioned earlier, we continue to see significant price reductions, but the corollary to that is that we're seeing just a significant increase in usage. So a few years ago, we saw 1 or 2 clients talking in petabytes, and now there are many clients talking in multiple petabytes of data. And so this has driven clients to evaluate, better automation and controls, and those technologies have been adopted. And in addition, we're seeing stratification of the services, aligning the service requirement of availability and retention with the technology, so that storage is made available when it needs to be available at the service level and it needs to be available at, and then the ability to push down into those various tiers, even into backup and archive, so that the spend is appropriate given the requirements around that particular data. So much more of a stratification of services into backup and storage than we've seen in the market. And again, that's trying to not only drive price lower, but also align the delivery cost with the actual solution. So you go back 10 years, and we had 1 gigabyte price for everything, and it's not uncommon today in transactions to see 6 or 7 or 8 price points for storage and backup services. Again, aligning the service level with the storage and recoverability, back to the service need, and then the price point that supports that.
I have a question here, Chris, and I mean this also came up. This probably relates more to the contact center side of it, but maybe it's true in storage as well. Is there a different kind of metric that's being used as a function of automation to track price performance? I'm thinking here of, like in the service desk, it might have been price per incident, or maybe it's changing to price per user or price per service minute. Are you seeing any of those kind of changes in the measurements that people should be taking?
Yeah, that's a great point. We do see, and you're spot on, in the service desk call center arena, we are seeing a change, more so in the IT support service desk arena. Traditionally, those services, if we go back 10 years or so, maybe longer, those services were priced on a per user basis. In the last, maybe, over time till present, those services have been priced on a per incident basis or per call basis. So, because that was the price driver, was really the number of calls that came in, because it was primarily labor. And now with adoption of technology and automation, providers are now moving back to a per supported user, and then committing to a guaranteed price reduction, because now they're incented to actually reduce the call volume by adopting automation. And so that's a way for them to take advantage of the savings opportunity that they're generating, and at the same time provide a lower price for customers, especially as the unit prices are going up. That doesn't look good in a transaction unless you understand that the call volumes are actually declining. So we do see this move, and it's just starting now, but we're seeing this move back to a sort of a per supported user price point, which kind of puts the responsibility in its proper place with the provider, so that the provider is actually incented to reduce the supported user cost over time. So that's an excellent point. I think in the other areas, those are already, have commoditized in a way that makes sense, where the client can actually drive the results. So like in the storage and server environments, there's enough of a menu for clients to be able to right-size their spend aligned with service levels, and that kind of aligns. But I think in the service desk, you're absolutely right. We're seeing that change evolve, where it makes much more sense for clients to be looking at a per supported user charge, if you will.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So the next area that we wanted to touch on is the application labor rate market, and the key here is, as you notice in the lower right-hand corner, we're continuing to see decreases, but the decrease is actually driven by changes in buying behaviors and requirements, not so much on sort of contract changes. When you look at a typical application contract, it's a sort of flat rate if it's priced on an FTE basis, and then COLA added to it. So when you're inside an application management agreement, the prices are tending to go up with COLA, whereas we're seeing market price decreases, and that's due to the changes that are occurring in the marketplace. From foreign exchange rate changes. There's been favorable exchange rate over the last 3 or 4 years with India, for example. So organizations that haven't taken advantage of that, are paying more than they should. And then of course there's global sourcing of labor. So India is not the only solution today. We're seeing much more work being done in the Philippines, Brazil, Mexico, in nearshore locations as well as offshore locations or in different time zones. And so that's another opportunity. So our view of the application labor market is, clients should really be looking to source different globally, not only for price, but also for service delivery requirements or needs. So looking for, domestic language support, whether it's English or whatever language you're looking for, as common time zone support. So Mexico is certainly a better, more closely aligned, at least to the U.S. market, than India is. So there's some benefits there, and the price points are starting to emerge as competition is heating up. And then the other part is to continually look at what we call the staffing pyramid, which is making sure that you're aligning the levels of support you need, or the skill levels you need, with the work that you're performing. So a lot of times we'll go in and do a benchmark, and the rates might be competitive, but in reality what's happened is the provider has staffed the function with much more senior individuals than is required for the particular solution, and that's an opportunity to drive out costs. So if they can provide lower cost resources as part of the solution, while maintaining that quality, that's what we're starting to see organizations doing in the marketplace, and benchmarking not just the price, but also the staffing pyramid, and what the staffing looks like is actually pretty valuable.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I guess the question is, would you say that, we hear a lot of people talking about managed services and applications. To what degree are you seeing that actually happen in practice, Chris?
Yeah, I would say 80 to 90% of what we see today is still FTE driven from an application management standpoint, but there is clearly a desire on both the part of providers and clients to move to much more of a managed service approach to application support, and so that's evolving and growing. We're actually building a capability to benchmark managed services. Again, that's probably where we want to get to from a market standpoint. Like all the other services are output-based. You pay for a managed OS, or you pay for a service desk call or a managed device. I think in the application market, we want to move to a managed application and the price associated with that. And I think more and more, that's kind of the right dynamic that we want to create, because we want providers to not only drive down the volume of incidents, but also continually create automation and adopt capabilities to improve the price performance, if you will, of the solution. And an FT model doesn't really incent the provider to do that. And so, I think clients and providers alike are trying to move in that direction to create that opportunity. So I expect to see that increasing over time.
Okay, that's good.
So network devices, again, this is another area where there's some movement, but again, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over that and just also quickly here on the telecom price trends that we're seeing. You know, we continue to see for commodity services significant price declines year on year. They've attenuated a little bit, but just like with storage, you know, these services have dropped significantly over time, and clients that stay with their current carrier certainly will see price concessions for that from that carrier to renew the contract, but they generally are not reductions that someone would see either when a benchmark is performed or when it's competitively bid. So, you know, this is an area where we're helping clients really drive cost, you know, out of these what basically are commodity solutions. You know, these are fairly well-defined solutions, fairly well-defined products in the market, and it just comes down to you know, what price you can get it for, and you know, what provider is going to provide that price to you. So the last area that we wanted to cover, at least briefly, is outside of the technology and moving into more of the business services. In this case, finance and accounting. You know, we continue to see we saw a decrease in, as I mentioned earlier, in the application space with FTEs. We saw a decrease in finance and accounting services pricing. Again, due to the rupee devaluation, you know, about a year or so ago, there was a pretty significant decrease there. Things have flattened out, and the next wave now that we're seeing occurring in this space is the adoption of, you know, robotic process automation or intelligent process automation. Again, driving labor out of the solution through automation of technology. And this market, we believe, is a market that will, you know, after, you know, sort of in the short term, we're seeing sort of a stabilization of price. But when we look at 2016 and beyond, because of the fact that this market is still fairly inefficient, we expect to see some significant price reductions, at least for some accounts. Today, we go in and we see, you know, we can see, you know, for similar services, clients paying 20 or 30% different prices, and that will obviously commoditize over time as this market continues to evolve and become much more of a commodity through automation.
Yeah, I guess I was going to add a point that you made me think of as you were saying that, Chris, and I guess it's part of the conclusion too. But one of the things that you've seen on some of these graphics is we're showing an average price, and we're also showing a high and low price. That's quite relevant when you're coming to end of contract, because our message really is about a sustainable contract. We want the client and provider to go into a contract or a renewal with the intent for it to stay. And so our recommendation is usually that you should go for the current, i.e. the prevailing average market price, as represented by what we call the current quarter market price. So we would suggest targeting the average market price, which is the very current price that's actually being paid for that exact set of services. And when we show the range of prices, we show the high and low being the top and bottom decile of the current data. That gives you an indication of how variable the pricing might be around that target price. But we typically don't recommend going for the lowest price for the reason of sustainability or profitability and quality of service provided, because those things, I think, Chris, are all in the mix, aren't they? They have to be considered as part of the pricing negotiation.
Well, I think that's a great point. You know, we do want to create, you know, for both clients and providers, sustainable relationships. And so, you know, we want, as part of our benchmark, when we do a benchmark, we want to accurately predict the price that someone would pay in the market, and we want that to be a sustainable deal. We don't want to create a situation, as you're pointing out, where you're driving the price so low because these services are fungible. You don't want to drive the price point so low that the provider ends up, trying to figure out ways to cut on service or cut labor, to be able to generate the margins that they need to run their business. And that's not. We want to make sure that the objectives of the client and the provider are as aligned as possible. And that's one area where if we can create a sustainable price, that's where we want to be able to have, the price be. So it does create that sustainability over time. Now, to your point, over time, as we mentioned, the market does move, and that's why it's incumbent on clients to either do a benchmark or, rebid the services in a competitive manner to ensure that they are maintaining that price competitiveness over time.
Yeah, if we go into the conclusions, I think that's certainly one of the things I would point out, that this whole issue, or the term we've used, disruptive technology, is the disruption is supposed to be to give you a step change in your price performance, but not to be disruptive in terms of a major impact on quality of service, not disruptive in availability and all those aspects of it. So it's really using the disruptive technology to drive you to a significantly lower price point for a given work volume, but maintaining or even improving the quality of that service delivered. So I think that's an important distinction to make on that.
Yep, absolutely.
So I guess we're almost out of time. Just a few conclusions here. I hope you've got some of these for yourselves. Again, feel free to ask more questions after the session, or contact us. We'll provide you the contact details in a moment. But I think the message really is that end of term is a really important time for clients and providers to come together and discuss what the client requires, what the services requirements are going forward, to get a deal that works not just for the first year, but for the term of the contract. And it's entirely reasonable to do that directly with a client and provider without going to RFP, but using a benchmark to establish a point to negotiate to in terms of price and service. I think that's an important aspect of it, and it's not just on a like-for-like basis. You should be using the benchmark to look at the what-if scenarios, to say what would happen if I allowed the provider to change the way they run this service, accepting that I may have to make some changes, but I'm going to get a significant benefit for doing that. I think that's an important message here. Equally, this applies to all service types, whether they're on the BPO or the ITO side. There are plenty of opportunities in both areas, a lot of it driven by labor, of course, but the automation technologies apply equally to both of those areas. I hope you've got some ideas on how to use benchmarks. They can be done much more quickly these days. So you're talking about a few weeks, not a few months, to get through. They're typically more cost-effective than they used to be and require very little information or input from the client to go through that. So again, I think the recommendation is to look at those as a way to help you go through your pricing discussions without having to go to RFP every time. And also that you can use the benchmark for multiple towers, multiple geographies, to allow you to look at these various options that are in front of you. And the last point I guess I would make is that we talk a lot about price, and obviously price is always kind of the end game, but service quality is important too, hence our message around sustainability of contracts and setting the right price, not just the lowest price, to make that deal sustainable. So quality is all about the relationship and the service performance, as well as the cost of service. So just want to make sure you keep those in mind. But with that, I think we are just about out of time. We have, you can see our contact information on our last slide here, and as Chris mentioned, we'll send out this deck to you after the session, so you have the chance to follow up. But in the meantime, we are just about done, I think. So thank you all for the time. I'm not sure if Alex, you have any closing words?
Yes, since we are a bit past the top of the hour, we have a few questions in the queue. We'll take those on offline, and so we will sign off now. And as Howard mentioned, we'll be following up with the slides and with access to a recording. So thank you very much for participating, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Have a good day.